Today I'm going to show you how to make a photo montage using Adobe Photoshop for the iPad. This is our finished product. So let's start. I'm going to start by creating a new blank document. I'm just going to use the Photoshop default. I know the picture that I'm going to use is landscape, so I'm going to keep my orientation at landscape and click create. The first thing I'm going to do is add my picture. So I'm going to click on the picture icon on the bottom left, and I'm going to choose from my camera roll because that's where I know my pictures are saved. I'm going to use the pictures that I took during the golden hour. I'm going to use this image of my cat. I'm going to resize my image so that it fits in my window or in my document, and click done. Now I'm going to go into my layers panel, and I'm going to rename this image. It's really important that you name your layers as soon as you bring them in, because later on this is going to be very important when we start duplicating them and making groups. So make sure to rename your layers. I am also going to redo my background color. So I'm going to grab this little eyedropper tool and I'm going to select a color from my image. I'm going to use the eyeball icon to turn that off. I need to make sure that I am clicking my background layer to fill with color so that it doesn't create a new layer. I'm going to turn my image back on. And with that layer selected, I'm going to create a new layer. For this one, I'm going to call it frame. So double click on your layer name and call that frame. I am going to use my lasso tool set to a square marquee tool. By clicking and holding, this gives me my marquee options. I want to make sure that I am on my square marquee. The other option boxes that you get are the add and subtract boxes. So I'm going to make sure that mine is set to add. I'm going to click and drag a rectangle. Next, I'm going to change to the second option of my marquee. This is going to allow me to cut the middle out. My goal is to create a frame. So I'm going to click and drag inside this to create a little frame, and I want my bottom section to be just a little bit bigger. I'm going to flip-flop my color so that white's on top, and I'm going to use my paint bucket tool and click inside, and it creates a frame. I am not going to deselect this yet, but I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to change my color to darker gray and fill this again. Now I do still have that white rectangle underneath. This layer is going to be our shadow. So I'm going to double click and call this one shadow. And I'm going to click and drag this underneath my white frame. I'm going to deselect. If we turn our frame layer off, we're going to add a filter to this, and we're going to choose Gaussian blur. And I'm going to make sure this is set to about 9 and click done. I'm going to turn my frame layer back on. Next, I'm going to add another layer. And going back to my marquee tool, I'm going to reselect the addition. I'm going to click and drag a rectangle that's the size of the inside of my frame. And I can go a little bit into my frame so I don't have to worry about this one being perfect. It's going to be hidden underneath my frame. I'm going to fill this with any color. just going to choose a different color. And with my paint bucket tool, I'm going to fill this. I'm going to double click on my layer name. This one we are going to call placeholder. And click rename. I can deselect this and I'm going to click and drag this to underneath my frame layer. Then I'm going to click on my image layer and drag it up above my placeholder layer. So right now in my layers, you see frame, image, placeholder, shadow. Using my options along the right hand side, I'm going to make sure that my image layer is selected, and I'm going to choose the clipping mask button. What this does is it trims all the other information so that my image is inside my placeholder. It doesn't get rid of this information, it just hides it. The next thing I'm going to do is link together my frame, my placeholder, and my shadow. To do this, I click this little dot 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 button, and I'm going to begin multiple select mode. I'm going to choose my frame, my placeholder, and my shadow, and I'm going to link those three together. I'm going to go back to begin multi-select mode and add in my image layer, and this time I'm going to click this little folder and it will turn everything into a group. Okay, if I click this little arrow next to group 1, I see that I have inside is my frame, my image, my placeholder, and my shadow. I'm going to rename group 1 to be center so that I know where this image is. Next, I'm going to click this dot 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 button again, and this time I'm going to choose duplicate group. Then I am going to click on my frame layer, and with my move tool, I'm going to click and drag this image somewhere else. It's really important that you have your layers linked so everything moves together. It's even more important that you don't have your image layer linked in with your frame, placeholder, and shadow layer. Otherwise, it'll move the whole image, and that is not what you want. The second tool over here on my left is the transform tool. I'm going to make this image a little bit smaller and tilt it just a little bit to add some variety to my collage, and click done. I'm going to rename my group, and I'm going to call this top left. I'm going to close up my center group. Clicking on my dot 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 button, I am going to duplicate my group again. Click on my frame layer and click and drag that to a new location. Choose transform. Rotate and size this image to where I like it and click done. Rename to top right. I'm going to continue this process of duplicating and arranging until I have enough frames to get an idea of what my image is as a whole. Another thing that I can do is click on my group and click and drag it to reorder. So I'm going to send that image back underneath. I can always go back and open up my group layers to and resize them. The one thing I cannot change is the actual shape of my frame. So in my beginning steps, if I'm not happy with my frame shape, I have to perfect that before I start duplicating my groups, because there's no way to go back and fix them all. So my final product has 6 different frames. You need to create a photo montage that has at least 5 frames. Inside of each group layer, I am looking for your frame layer, your image, your placeholder layer, and your shadow layer. Each of your groups needs to be named. In your Google slide presentation, you'll have a slide that asks you to list your layers. I am looking for you to write down in the first one, frame, number 2, image with clipping mask, number 3 is placeholder, and number 4 is shadow. When you are finished, you're going to upload this to Google Classroom by clicking that upload button. You are going to publish and export. A JPEG is just fine. It gives you some options of where you can save this. You can upload it right into Google Classroom, or you can save it into your camera roll and upload it that way. You will also need to take a screenshot by clicking your home button and your lock button so that I can see your layers. Make sure that you have at least one of your layers open so that I can see that you have all those layers on the inside. And here's our final product.